I sat in my car outside my apartment building, hands trembling as I stared at my phone screen. The missed calls from Dad kept flashing, and his voicemail echoed in my mind like a broken record. Maya, we need to talk about Sophia. You have to help your sister. My heart sank because I knew exactly what this meant. Another crisis, another mess, another expectation that I would swoop in and fix everything with my checkbook. This was not the first time my family had come to me with their hands out, and deep down I feared it would not be the last. Before I dive into this story that changed everything between my family and me, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And if you have ever felt like the family ATM, hit that like button. Do not forget to subscribe because trust me, you will want to hear how this all unfolded. Now let me take you back to where it all started going wrong. Growing up in suburban Colorado, I learned early that life was not going to hand me anything on a silver platter. Born in 1995, I was the first child, and my parents David and Linda made sure I understood what responsibility meant. From the time I turned 10, I was washing my own clothes, learning to cook simple meals, and keeping my room spotless. Every Saturday morning, I had chores lined up like a military operation. I had to earn my allowance, and even then, it was barely enough to buy a candy bar at the corner store. But when my sister Sophia came along 4 years later, it was like watching my parents transform into completely different people. Where I had to ask permission to buy a pack of gum, Sophia got whatever caught her eye at the toy store. While I was folding laundry and setting the dinner table, she was playing with her endless collection of Barbies and video games. I remember watching her get a brand new bicycle for her 8th birthday, while I was still riding the second-hand one my parents had bought me 3 years earlier. The differences became even more stark when we reached college age. I worked 25 hours a week at a local coffee shop, my hands permanently stained with espresso, and my back aching from long shifts. Between my part-time job and a modest academic scholarship, I managed to cover most of my expenses at the state university. I lived in the oldest dormitory on campus, where the heating barely worked in winter, and the walls were so thin I could hear every conversation from the neighboring rooms. My meals consisted mostly of ramen noodles and whatever free food I could find at campus events. Meanwhile, Sophia was living in a completely different world. Mom and Dad paid her full tuition at a prestigious private college 2 hours away. Plus, they covered her housing in a luxury apartment complex with a pool and fitness center. She drove a nearly new Honda that Dad had bought for her 18th birthday, while I was still taking the city bus everywhere. When I visited her campus, I was amazed by her spacious apartment, complete with granite countertops, and a walk-in closet full of designer clothes. The academic path told the same story of contrasts. I buckled down, chose accounting as my major, and graduated summa cum laude with a 3.9 GPA. I had my eye on the prize, a stable career that would give me financial independence. I started working at a mid-sized firm right after graduation, and slowly but surely climbed the ladder through pure determination and 60-hour work weeks. Sophia, on the other hand, treated college like an extended vacation. She changed her major 3 times, starting with art history, then switching to psychology, and finally settling on marketing. But even with the marketing degree, she never actually finished her program. She was always 1 or 2 classes short of graduating, with excuses ranging from difficult professors to scheduling conflicts with her social life. While I was saving every penny to buy my first home, a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood in Denver, Sophia was still living with our parents at age 23. She had a series of part-time jobs that never seemed to last more than a few months. There was the retail position at an upscale boutique that ended when she got into an argument with her manager. Then came the receptionist job at a dental office, which she quit because she said the hours were too demanding. Each time she left a job, Mom and Dad would support her, while she figured out her next move. That is when the request started. The first time was almost innocent. Dad called me on a Thursday evening and explained that Sophia needed help with her car insurance payment. She had forgotten to budget for it, he said. and they were a little tight that month. Could I lend her $200? It was temporary, of course. She would pay me back as soon as she got her next paycheck. I agreed without hesitation, because family helps family, right? But the requests kept coming. A month later, it was her cell phone bill. Then it was money for job interview clothes. Each time the amount grew a little larger, and the justifications became more elaborate. Mom would call with tear-filled explanations about how Sophia was going through a difficult time and just needed a little boost to get back on her feet. Around this time, Sophia started dating Jake, a mechanic who worked at a garage downtown. On the surface, he seemed like a decent guy, but I noticed some troubling patterns. Despite his blue-collar job, they were constantly going on expensive dinner dates and weekend trips to mountain resorts. Sophia's social media was filled with photos of designer handbags, jewelry, and shopping sprees that clearly cost more than what either of them was earning. I started asking subtle questions about where the money was coming from, but Sophia would just laugh and say they were living their best life. Jake would make vague comments about investments and side hustles, but nothing he said ever added up to me. I had a sinking feeling that the money my parents were giving Sophia, and by extension, the money I was giving them, was funding this lifestyle. The first real crisis came on a snowy February morning when both my parents called me simultaneously on a three-way call. Mom was crying before she even said hello, and Dad's voice had that strained tone he got when he was trying to stay calm in a bad situation. Sophia had racked up $3,200 in credit card debt, they explained. She had been using the card for necessities, but had lost track of her spending. "It is just this once," Dad assured me. "Sophia has learned her lesson, and she promises this will never happen again. We just need to get her out of this hole so she can start fresh." I stared out my office window at the Denver skyline, feeling that familiar knot forming in my stomach. $3,200 was not pocket change for me, but it was not impossible either. I had been saving for a vacation, my first real trip in 3 years, but family came first. I agreed to help transferring the money that same afternoon. Sophia sent me a heartfelt text message thanking me and promising she would be more careful with money. She swore up and down that she had learned from this mistake and would never put the family in this position again. I believed her, because I wanted to believe her. But less than a week later, I saw photos on her Instagram of a brand new Kate Spade handbag that retailed for $800. When I asked her about it, she claimed it was a gift from Jake. The second crisis happened just 4 months later, and this one was harder to brush off as a simple mistake. Sophia had been driving Jake's car when she rear-ended another vehicle at a red light. She did not have comprehensive insurance, and Jake's policy had a high deductible that they could not afford to pay. The damage to the other car was extensive, and the total bill came to $5,800. This time I hesitated when my parents called. The amount was significant, and I was starting to see a pattern that made me uncomfortable. But Mom painted a picture of legal troubles and potential lawsuits if the bill was not paid quickly. "You know how these things can snowball," she said. "Sophia could end up with a judgment against her that would ruin her credit forever." Dad chimed in with the family loyalty speech. "We have always been there for each other," he said. "When you needed help with college, we found a way. When you were starting your career, we supported you. Now it is time for you to help your sister." I ended up withdrawing the money from my savings account, watching my carefully built nest egg shrink by almost $6,000 in 6 months. The financial pressure was starting to affect my daily life. I had to cancel my gym membership, cut back on groceries, and postpone some needed repairs to my house. Sophia's gratitude seemed genuine this time. She even offered to set up a payment plan to pay me back $50 a month. I agreed, though, deep down, I suspected I would never see that money again. Sure enough, after 2 months of payments, the checks stopped coming. When I asked about it, Sophia said she was between jobs again and promised to resume payments as soon as she found work. The third crisis was the one that should have been my wake-up call, but I was too deep in the family guilt cycle to see it clearly. Sophia wanted to buy a car, but her credit was too damaged from previous financial mistakes to qualify for a loan. The solution, according to my parents, was for me to co-sign the loan so she could get the vehicle she needed to find better employment. I said no immediately. Co-signing a loan meant I would be legally responsible if Sophia defaulted, and given her track record, that seemed like a virtual certainty. But the family pressure campaign went into overdrive. Dad called me selfish and accused me of not caring about my sister's future. Mom cried and said I was turning my back on family when they needed me most. How is Sophia supposed to get a good job without reliable transportation? Mom asked through her tears. You have everything you need, and you cannot spare a little help for your own sister. The emotional manipulation wore me down over several weeks. Every family dinner became an uncomfortable negotiation session. Every phone call included guilt trips and subtle accusations that I was being unreasonable. Eventually, I caved and co-signed the loan for an $18,000 used BMW that Sophia had fallen in love with at a dealership. I should have insisted on a practical, inexpensive car, but Sophia argued that she needed something professional-looking for job interviews. The monthly payments were $412, which she promised faithfully to make herself. I made her sign a written agreement stating that she was responsible for all payments and that I was only co-signing as a favor. For the first 3 months, the payments came through on time. I started to think that maybe Sophia was finally growing up and taking responsibility for her decisions. But then I got a call from the bank informing me that the payment was 30 days late. When I confronted Sophia, she had a story about a mix-up with her bank and assured me it would be resolved immediately. But the late payments kept happening. Every other month I would get a notice, and every time Sophia would have an excuse. Her hours had been cut at work. She had unexpected medical expenses. Jake was between jobs. The excuses varied, but the result was always the same. My credit score was taking a hit, and I was constantly stressed about when the next crisis would hit. That was when I had a conversation with my coworker Amanda that opened my eyes to what was really happening. We were having lunch at a sandwich shop near our office, and I was venting about my family situation. Amanda listened patiently as I explained how I was trying to help Sophia get back on her feet, but nothing seemed to be working. Maya, Amanda said gently, you're not helping her. You're enabling her. Those words hit me like a physical blow. Amanda went on to explain that by constantly rescuing Sophia from the consequences of her poor decisions, I was actually preventing her from learning how to manage money and take responsibility for her life. Every time you bail her out, Amanda said, you're teaching her that someone else will always fix her problems. That Friday evening phone call will be burned into my memory forever. I had just finished a long day at the office and was looking forward to a quiet weekend when both my parents called, their voices tight with panic and desperation. Maya, we need to talk, Dad said without any preamble. Sophia and Jake have gotten themselves into serious trouble, and we need your help. My heart sank as they laid out the situation. Sophia and Jake had decided to invest in cryptocurrency, convinced by some online guru that they could make quick money and pay off all their existing debts. They had maxed out credit cards to the tune of $47,000, using cash advances to buy Bitcoin and other digital currencies at what they thought was the perfect time to get rich. Of course, their timing was catastrophic. The crypto market crashed just weeks after their investment, wiping out nearly everything they had put in. Now they were facing minimum payments on multiple credit cards that totaled more than their combined monthly income, and the interest rates were pushing the debt higher every single day. We have already done what we can, Mom said, her voice shaking. We took out a second mortgage on the house to help them with part of it, but we still need $28,000 to get them current on their payments. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. My parents, who were supposed to be planning for retirement, had put their house at risk to bail out Sophia again. And now they were asking me to contribute an amount that would wipe out most of my savings and require me to take out loans of my own. You are the only one who can help us, Dad continued. You have good credit, a steady job, and you have always been responsible with money. We know it is a lot to ask, but family takes care of family. I told them I needed time to think about it, but they pressed for an immediate answer. The creditors were threatening legal action, they said, and every day we waited would make the situation worse. I finally agreed to meet with everyone the next day to discuss the situation face to face. That Saturday afternoon, I walked into my parents' house feeling like I was heading to my own execution. Sophia and Jake were sitting on the couch, but instead of looking ashamed or apologetic, they seemed almost casual about the whole situation. Sophia was scrolling through her phone, and Jake was watching a football game on television. I decided to approach this like the business problem it was. I asked to see all the credit card statements, the investment records, and any documentation about exactly how much money was owed and to whom. I wanted a complete picture before I committed to anything. What I discovered was even worse than I had imagined. The cryptocurrency investment was just the tip of the iceberg. Mixed in with the cash advances for digital currency were charges for expensive restaurants, designer clothing, a weekend trip to Las Vegas, and even a hot tub that Jake had bought for his apartment. How exactly did you think you were going to pay for all this? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Jake shrugged and said, It was supposed to be a sure thing. We were going to make enough money to pay everyone back and have plenty left over. Sophia chimed in with her victim voice. I know we made mistakes, but everybody makes mistakes. I am still your sister, and I thought I could count on family to help me when I am in trouble. The more questions I asked, the more defensive they became. When I pointed out that they had used money I had given them for previous emergencies to fund their gambling addiction, Jake actually had the nerve to say, It is not gambling when you do your research. Dad tried to redirect the conversation back to finding a solution. Look, what is done, he said. The question now is, how do we move forward as a family? But I was starting to see this situation differently. I asked Sophia directly what her plan was for paying back this money if I helped her this time. Her answer was vague nonsense about finding a better job and cutting back on expenses. When I pressed for specifics, she got angry and accused me of being mean and unsupportive. Why do I need a detailed plan? She demanded. I am your sister. Is it not enough that I am asking for help? Mom jumped in with tears and emotional manipulation. She talked about how disappointed she was that I was being so cold toward my own family. She reminded me of all the sacrifices she and Dad had made for both of us over the years. She questioned whether I had forgotten the values they had tried to instill in me about loyalty and compassion. The pressure was enormous. I could feel myself wavering, ready to give in, just to make the crying and accusations stop. But then Jake made a comment that changed everything. Look, Maya, he said with a smirk, it is just family helping family. You make good money, you do not have kids, and you can afford it. What is the big deal? That casual assumption that I owed them my hard-earned money, that my financial stability was somehow their safety net, made something inside me snap. I realized that I had been looking at this all wrong. This was not about helping family members who had fallen on hard times through no fault of their own. This was about being manipulated and taken advantage of by people who had never learned to face the consequences of their own choices. I looked around the room at their expectant faces, all waiting for me to open my wallet one more time, and I finally understood what Amanda had been trying to tell me. I was not helping Sophia by constantly rescuing her. I was actually hurting her by preventing her from growing up and learning how to handle her own problems. I stood up from the kitchen table and looked each of them in the eye, feeling a clarity I had not experienced in years. I will not be paying this debt. I said, my voice steady and calm. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Sophia started crying and screaming about how I was abandoning her. Jake looked genuinely shocked that I was not going to hand over nearly $30,000 to fix their mess. But it was my parents' reaction that hurt the most. "How can you be so selfish?" Mom demanded, her face red with anger. "This is your sister we are talking about, your own flesh and blood." Dad tried a different approach, appealing to my sense of family honor. "What kind of person turns their back on family when they need help the most?" he asked. "Is this what we raised you to be?" I took a deep breath and explained my decision as calmly as I could. "I have been enabling Sophia's irresponsible behavior for years," I said. "Every time I bail her out, I'm teaching her that someone else will always fix her problems. That is not love, that is harm." I told them about my conversation with Amanda and how I had come to understand that constantly rescuing Sophia was actually preventing her from learning and growing. "You have created a situation where Sophia never has to face the consequences of her choices," I continued. "She spends money she does not have because she knows family will cover her debts." Sophia was not interested in hearing about personal growth or life lessons. "You have plenty of money," she sobbed. "You could help me if you wanted to, but you're choosing not to. You're choosing money over your own sister." Jake tried to jump in with more guilt trips about family loyalty, but I cut him off. "You're not even family," I said firmly. "And you have been part of the problem from day one, encouraging Sophia to live beyond her means and make reckless financial decisions." The conversation devolved into shouting and accusations. Mom called me heartless and said I had become cold and materialistic. Dad accused me of thinking I was better than the rest of the family. Sophia threatened to cut contact with me forever if I did not help her this time. Finally, I had heard enough. "If you cannot respect my boundaries and my decision," I said, "then we have nothing more to discuss." I gathered my purse and walked toward the door, feeling lighter with every step. As I reached the threshold, Sophia made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. "You're going to destroy this family," she called after me. "Is that what you want?" I turned back and looked at her one final time. "No," I said. "I want you to learn how to take care of yourself. But if this family can only function by me constantly giving money, I cannot afford to fix problems I did not create, then maybe it deserves to be destroyed." The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. The guilt was overwhelming at first. I questioned my decision, constantly wondering if I was being cruel and selfish. My parents called and texted repeatedly, alternating between guilt trips and angry accusations. Extended family members reached out on social media, having heard some version of the story that painted me as the villain who had abandoned her family in their time of need. I found myself blocking phone numbers and limiting my social media interactions just to get some peace. The constant pressure and criticism were taking a toll on my mental health, and I realized I needed professional help to work through the complex emotions I was experiencing. Therapy was a revelation. My counselor, Dr. Peterson, helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a form of family trauma. She explained that I had been conditioned from childhood to prioritize everyone else's needs over my own, and that setting healthy boundaries felt wrong because I had never been taught that my own well-being mattered. Through our sessions, I came to understand that my parents had unknowingly created a toxic dynamic where my value as a family member was tied to my usefulness as a financial resource. Dr. Peterson helped me see that loving someone sometimes means allowing them to experience the natural consequences of their actions, even when it is painful to watch. As the months passed, I slowly began rebuilding my life without the constant stress of family financial crises. I focused on my career with renewed energy and was promoted to senior accountant with a significant salary increase. For the first time in years, I was able to save money without worrying about the next emergency call from my family. I started investing in myself in ways I had never allowed before. I joined a yoga studio and discovered a passion for meditation that helped me manage stress and anxiety. I took up painting and found that creating art gave me a sense of peace and accomplishment that had been missing from my life. I even started traveling, taking small weekend trips to nearby states, and planning a larger vacation to Europe. Most importantly, I began building genuine relationships with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide financially. I grew closer to my neighbors, joining a book club and participating in community events. I started dating again, and for the first time, I was able to form a relationship with someone emotionally mature who respected my boundaries and supported my decisions. About 2 years after our final confrontation, I learned through a mutual family friend that Sophia had ultimately been forced to declare bankruptcy. She and Jake had broken up when the financial pressure became too much, and she had to move back in with our parents full-time. The house that my parents had mortgaged to help with her debts was foreclosed upon, and they were forced to downsize to a small apartment across town. When I heard this news, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. I was sad for my parents, who were now dealing with their own financial crisis in their 60s. But I did not regret my decision to set boundaries. In fact, seeing the ultimate consequences of their choices confirmed that I had made the right call. The final update came from Amanda, who had kept in touch with our mutual acquaintances. Sophia had finally been forced to find steady employment and was working full-time at a customer service job that barely covered her basic expenses. For the first time in her adult life, she was living within her means simply because she had no other choice. As I reflect on this entire experience, I have learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. Setting boundaries is not selfish. It is necessary for everyone's growth and well-being. I learned that being family does not mean being an endless ATM, and that real love sometimes requires watching people face their own consequences. My relationship with my parents has never fully recovered, and I have made peace with that reality. I send birthday cards and holiday greetings, but the close relationship we once had is gone. It is a loss I mourn, but it is also a sacrifice I made to preserve my own mental health and financial stability. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who were taking advantage of your generosity? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to like this video if it resonated with your own experiences. Subscribe for more stories about family dynamics and personal growth, and share this with anyone who might be struggling with similar situations in their own life. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you remember that sometimes saying no is the most compassionate choice you can make. True love sometimes means watching people face their own consequences, because that is how they learn to become better.